Welcome to Saddle Up and Sound Off,
our weekly variety podcast inviting our listeners to challenge beliefs and find inspiration in thought-provoking conversations and stories. And we're your hosts, Suzanne and Dwight.
Previously, in episode 1, Ian talked about his life growing up in South Africa, playing with the monkeys and his pet giraffe Shorty, as well as the safaris and the bushmen. He talked about attending Pretoria Boys High and his reflections of appreciation for his upbringing and his continual attitude of gratitude for life and the people in it. In episode 2, Ian will talk about his journey to the United States of America by way of cargo ship and making his way across country to Casper, Wyoming, where he attended college at Casper College. He'll also talk about his deep-rooted faith in God and the story of meeting the love of his life, my mom, Sally.
Then coming over here in 1968 and meeting this incredible Steve Barber at college. And their family sort of adopted me. Well, I'm not sure if they adopted me or I adopted them, but anyway, have absolutely become part and parcel and fiber of my life since then. One of so many people who have influenced and affected my life in lessons learned. And, you know, interestingly, so many of the lessons I learned is not just from people who were doing things right, but as much, if not more often, from looking at people doing things the way I thought, well, that's the way not to do it, and learned a lot from that. But Steve and his family are one of those who led me back to the Lord. And, you know, I just want to say, when we talk about thankfulness and gratitude and lessons learned, I am so thankful for learning and what I believe, and I don't know if this is right or not, I just know it's what I believe. And that is that God is there to be with us during our tough times, to help us through, and to be at our side and to be a strength for us to draw from. My perception, again, I have no idea if this is right or not, but my perception is that there are so many people who are led to believe that God is there to prevent or to stop the misery and trials and tribulations that invariably we all face at some point in our lives.
Exactly.
And that, I believe, is the cause why people ebb and flow, come and go in Christianity, is because they're taught that, well, if you do this and do that, you're going to be rewarded. And if you ask for this and ask for that, and if you behave this way and that way, you know, then he's going to not let these things happen. Well, I don't believe that's the case at all. I believe he's there not to say we're not going to suffer trials and tribulations, as we all have, as I said, but that during those trials and tribulations, I will be there for you. And Lord knows, we have seen that in spades, starting with your accident, Dwight, when you lost your leg. And I was when the trauma surgeon got through talking to us and telling us he didn't think he was going to be able to save your life. Never mind an amputation. That was the minor piece. And your mother was calm as a cucumber, and I was a slobbering mess. And I said to your mother, did you hear what the head of the trauma team just said? And she said, yep, it's not in God's plan to take Dwight now. And I said, oh, great. I wish you would have told me that. But anyway, standing by us and me being able to draw on his strength for those 30, however many days you were in hospital, and I never left the hospital. I was at your side in bed because I just
Yeah.
couldn't face the thought of you dying and me not being there in your last moments, and having God there, and the tremendous inspiration. Most kids talk about, well, I was inspired by my parents and they were so great and such a role model and so on and so forth. Well, in our case, you were my role model and my inspiration for knowing that with God's help, of course, you can overcome anything
Yeah.
with determination and with faith. And I am so thankful for you. And one of the great things about dying slowly like this is we've had the time to say these awesome goodbyes and
Absolutely. Yeah.
to express those feelings and gratitude. And I mean, I don't know how you script a better ending than I'm having. I couldn't be more thankful. I couldn't be more pleased. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. But there goes my ADD again. What were we talking about?
No, that's fine. We were talking about Steve Barber and the influences you had from his family and everything, but the journey to get from South Africa to the United States,
Yeah.
you you talk about faith, and that had to be a lot of faith to in those days. I mean, nowadays we jump on a plane and there we are, you know. But back
Yeah.
then it
Oh,
was a much different process, and a lot. I can only imagine there was a lot of anguish and anxiety, not knowing what's going to happen. You decided you're going to come to the United States, and what happened?
yeah. Oh, my goodness, Dwight. Yeah. So, so the decision was made, thankfully, with the help again of a very dear friend of ours, Lapis Labuschagne in South Africa, who was head of the all of the game reserves in South Africa. And um, he was over for dinner one night, and he was actually the one who had said, you need to do veteran, because I told him I wanted to go in wildlife. And he was the one when I was still in high school who said, you need to do wildlife, you need to do veterinary medicine and become a wildlife veterinarian for us. And anyway, Lapis came to America and visited 5 states in the West and toured them and looked at their wildlife management courses. And he came back, and over dinner he said to me and Opan Grand, he said, what you really should think about, Ian, is quit veterinary medicine, which I wasn't doing very well with anyway. And so it was music to my ears. He says, and why don't you apply and see if you can get into one of these uh, colleges and do this course in wildlife management and help us set up a course in wildlife management in South Africa. And so, of course, that was music to my ears, not so much to Opan Grand, because
Sure.
this was the mid '60s and all the riots on campuses and people getting killed, and they thought I would never survive 4 years on an American campus. So anyway, that's how that came about, um, and so I immediately quit and went to work to start saving my money, which I saved $1,000 U.S. Dollars. Um, which at the time, now I can't tell you, but the exchange rate was vastly different from what it is today. But anyway, I know it converted to 1,000 US dollars to come over to the States, and a very dear, very long time, multi generational family friend of ours who was actually a director for his score, the mining company, iron ore mining company in South Africa. He got it organized so that I could get a berth on a freighter on Farrell Lines and come to the United States. And so that's how we did it. So I left from Cape Town, thanks to Uncle Bale. And it was an awesome trip. We traveled up the west coast of Africa, loading coffee and all kinds of different things.
Wow.
Eventually got to Boston, but I have never ever been so scared in my life And you know what the interesting thing was, Dwight? I didn't know what I was scared of. I
Yeah.
was I was scared of not knowing, and I
Oh,
was
the unknown.
I was petrified. And obviously there was nothing to be scared of. I didn't even know what I was scared of. I was just scared.
Yeah.
And when I landed in Boston and had to take my three metal trunks that I had my world possessions in over to the Greyhound station from the freighter, and book my Greyhound bus tickets from Boston over to Casper, Wyoming. Uh, I was scared, and actually, I had good reason for being scared because while I was getting my tickets, somebody stole part of my luggage in the Greyhound bus station, one of my metal trunks. I don't even know what I had in it, but anyway, one of my
The
metal,
whole chunk.
the whole trunk, everything was gone.
Wow.
So probably it was fortunate I came back when I did because they probably would have taken them all, but they were big, heavy metal trunks. So anyway, so then started that journey across this great country and
All on a Greyhound bus.
all on a Greyhound bus from place to place to place. See snow for the first time, TV for the first time. It was awesome. It was awesome. But anyway, we were talking about something else.
Well, no, I mean, you came, arrived in Boston and traveled to Casper to
Yeah.
attend Casper College, right? And if I'm right, that's where you ended up meeting Steve College.
Yeah. Yeah. So the reason that happened is I arrived early. This was end of 68. I don't know, October, November. But I was like 2 months early for the January semester to start. So I got to Casper College and I said, I'm here. And, what dorm do I check into? And the admissions guy, awesome guy, whose name I don't recall, who had worked with me all the time in South Africa, said, well, it's too early. I said, yeah, I know, but I'll just stay in the dorm. He said, no, you won't. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I don't have any money to go and stay in a hotel or get an apartment. I said, I've always had this fascination. Of course, we had all the Western movies we grew up on in South Africa and had a total fascination for cowboys in the West.
Yeah.
And I said, I'd love to work on uh, on a ranch here somewhere. And I said, I'll do it for board and room. And he said, no problem. He said, there'll be a lot of people who'll take you on for that. So I said, well, how do I get to do that? And he said, well, there's cowboy parties in town every night. Just go to one of the cowboy parties and put the word out. And so I was staying in the dorm. I was staying with a proctor um, in McIntyre Hall. I remember that. Anyway, so the proctor told me about where the parties were, or took me to the party. I don't remember. So that night I went to this party and I started putting the word out. The next thing, this guy comes up to me and puts his arm around me. He says, "You're coming home with me this weekend." And I said, "Oh, really? Where's that?" He said, "We have a ranch up in Gillette." And turns out that Steve's grandparents on both sides, both his mother and his father's side, were homesteaders up in that part of the country. And so I said, well, probably should let them know. He said, I've already let them know and they're expecting us. And so that's how it happened. And oh my goodness, what that opened up for me for the rest of my life. They opened their homes and their hearts, and it was the most unbelievable experience. And here I got thrown into the snow and feeding cattle with Steve's dad, Ralph, never having experienced anything like that in my life. Hard physical labor in South Africa was always done by your servants. So, the kind of work we were doing was not what I was used to growing up doing. And anyway, so froze my tush off and just absolutely loved every bit of it. And then for the holidays, um, I would obviously help out at the ranch, but also roughneck in the oil fields there. That's
Mhm.
why it's oil and coal and gas and uranium country. Well,
Yeah.
not too much uranium at Gillette, but anyway. So roughneck oil fields was awesome money because we would pull double shifts and it was adventurous and dangerous, and all the other oil rig workers tried to kill you because they hated students. And so they were always up for tricks to get you hurt on the rigs, and there was plenty of ways to do that. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. Great, great experiences.
So during that time, did you ever get to communicate with your mom and dad with Opon Grand?
Well, that's so interesting because today we think nothing of picking up the phone and calling
Yeah.
or whatever. And back there, that was just not an option. I don't remember the prices, but a long distance, an international call in those days was just prohibitive. So we would communicate by letters. I sadly was not a very good son and not a very good communicator. Do we still have any of Open Grand's letters? Do you know? Sally, I don't know if we still have some of their letters, but in fact we do because I looked at some, Sally, a while ago. I don't know if it was from that early on, um, but anyway, so no, communications was very, very rare, little and far between. And thankfully, Opa and Gran came over to visit us, of course, years later. In fact, their first visit was here. Here was when you were born. They were actually had arrived in the country, so that's 50 years ago,
Yeah.
50 some years ago.
So yeah, you went to you had all these experiences from, I mean, a foreigner not knowing anything coming to the United States, meeting Steve Barber and working on their ranch. And how did that lead to meeting Sally, to meeting Mom?
So that was another God thing. Um, so in my second year, um, my family um, was bidding on a government contract. We used to get government contracts because, as you know, OPA was advisor to the Minister of Health, and as those things
Mhm.
go, it's sort of the inner circle, and uh, we were, I believe, on the inside track for a lot of these type things. And anyway, we've been in a contract to move. Um, that that's when well, of course, apartheid was already up and going and in full
Mhm.
force in those days. Uh, but they were getting rid of the shanty towns, which
Mhm.
were the result of the natives moving in from the bush into the cities for work and then just building a shanty town to live in.
Yeah.
And so the government was building them houses and looking for sub-economic housing. And there was actually a guy in Riverton, Wyoming, of all places, would you believe? Because as you know, that's where Steve's wife, Georgia, and her family are from. They were settlers in Riverton, homesteaded on a ranch out there.
Mhm.
Anyway, this guy in Riverton had developed this fiberglass octagon teepee looking building that you could put up 800 square feet of living area in about 8 hours. It just sort of all fit together and everything was pre-costed. Anyway, so they've been in a contract, got the contract, and they wanted me, my brother, Joe wanted to come over and help with the establishment of getting this built in South Africa. And so I was on my way to South Africa. I'd got an apartment in Denver to do some things related to this business on my way to South Africa. And literally a few weeks before I was due to leave, shows you God's sense of humor. Um, I was sitting at my desk and looking out my window. It was one of those octagon-shaped apartments that were so popular in those days. It was built like a fort. You had the inside courtyard with a swimming pool, and then all the rooms faced. You had balconies or passages that your door opened onto on the outside, and so I look up one day and I see this girl walking down the passage, and it's literally like a lightning bolt. And God goes, "Zap, there's your wife." And I looked up and I said, "All right, but it's not really a good time right now." And but it was so cool. It was so awesome. It was so amazing.
So
Unfortunately,
did God tell Sally the same thing at the same time?
unfortunately, no. So again, part of God's humor and wisdom. And so Sally made it very, very difficult for me. But by persistence and begging and pleading, eventually was able to get her to open her door slightly. And then eventually, because I had a black and white TV and she had a colored TV, and there was a program about South Africa coming on. And I said, "I'd really like to see it in color. Can I please come and watch it at your place?" So anyway, she let me in. But then I knew I had a problem because I was about to leave to go back to South Africa. How do I
Yeah.
propose to this girl that God knows she's my wife? I know she's my wife, but she don't know. So, so it was a problem. And anyway, I persevered, and eventually I said to her, or asked her if she would come over to South Africa, um, and see what South Africa was like. And thankfully, your mother agreed. And then when she did come to South Africa, I thought, well, because at that point I had no intention of coming back to America. And I thought, well, I'll give her a couple of weeks here, let her see the country, let her meet my crazy family, and then I'll propose the night before she leaves. And she would have had a chance to, be able to make a well informed decision. And then actually, the day she arrived, I decided, no, 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 no. Wait, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to propose tonight, because if she says no, she's got 2 weeks of misery to spend with this lousy South African after having said no. And lo and behold, God came through and it worked. And the rest, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah,
So
yeah.
now tell me, so going back and forth, I'm assuming that during this contract phase that you guys are working on, that was all done via mail.
Yes.
So when you decided that you were going to go back to South Africa, and took mom with you, was that on a plane or?
Yes. Yes. But I didn't take mom with me because like I said, I was literally about to leave. But mom came over, I don't know, maybe a month or two later
Yeah.
is when she came over. But the rest of that story, again, God's sense of humor. Even though we were the low bidder on the contract and assumed that we had won the contract, um, just because we were the low bidder and just because we thought we were big cheeses and on the inside track, we didn't win the contract. Yes, we were low bidder, but we didn't get the contract. So
Yeah.
there we were in South Africa, because then I proposed to mom. She came back and resigned, sold her little MG midget sports car, Triumph Spitfire. Triumph Spitfire, a little convertible, and sold all her worldly goods and came over to South Africa. And then we got married there in 1971. And so then decided mom was perfectly happy living in South Africa. It's an awesome, awesome lifestyle.
Yeah.
Uh, every everybody had servants and swimming pools and tennis courts, and I mean, just a very, very privileged lifestyle. But I decided I'd like to come back and restart college and finish up what I was originally intending to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mom and I worked, saved our money, and a few months after we were married, got on, would you believe, the same Farrell Lines freighter.
Wow.
and came back, but that time landed in Boston, and again had just an awesome trip going up the West Coast and picking up coffee.
And I'm sure that time there wasn't as much anxiety as the first.
Not for me. I didn't. Yeah. So
that's all for today. Thanks for saddling up with us.
To catch next week's Sound Off with Suzanne and Dwight, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. You can also contact us via email at saddleupandsoundoff@gmail.com.